Donald Ware was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1935. He's enjoyed a successful career as a fighter pilot in the U.S. Air Force, including flying supersonic fighter jets, F100 and 105, until retiring in 1982 after 27 years of service. He's also a nuclear engineer by education, but in his later years, he's been a UFO researcher. It all stems from a lifelong awareness of the human body as a vessel. As a child, he experienced multiple out-of-body experiences. He was able to float or fly out of his body and go anywhere he wanted. He's an eyewitness to the Washington Flap of 1952, 17 years old at the time, and later he became a director of MUFON in Florida. Over the last decades, he has focused on the non-physical aspects of the UFO and alien encounter record. His life experiences and curious mind led him on this path through a broader lens of cosmology and human soul research, how science and spirituality are perhaps two sides of the same coin. Working his way through available data on alien abductions, the accounts of pregnancies, reproduction, and ultimately the accounts of the existence of human-alien hybrid beings, his research brought together the two aspects that interested him most, connecting the concepts of the human body as a spiritual vessel, combined with the presence of aliens on Earth and their possible agenda. Let's listen to Lieutenant Colonel Donald Ware.
My name is Donald M. Ware. I was born in Richmond, Virginia, raised in Arlington. I attended Duke University. I got a first degree in mechanical engineer in 1957 and commissioned in the Air Force the same day through the ROTC program. I didn't know whether I wanted to be an engineer or an Air Force officer, so I took a one-year delayed active duty and went to North American Aviation for 10 months, decided I'd rather fly the airplane instead of work on it. I was working on F100 flight test program heat and vent system, and so I kind of lucked out when I got into pilot training because I put my name in the pot for 100s, and we only had 3 100 slots in the class, and I got one of them. So after 10 years of flying fighters, they were going to convert me to F111. This pin, this rather strange pin that I wear, is probably describes one of the most important things going on this planet right now. I think these little guys are Zeta Reticulans that many of the abductees, UFO abductees, see in their secret nightlife, if you want to call it that. And I'm absolutely convinced from everything I've seen over the past 52 years that there's a long-term program to upgrade our biological computer. Anybody knows anything about computers knows you have to upgrade your computer every now and then. I think we're getting a bigger hard drive, a faster chip, and a new USB port for telepathy. And let me show you what I think you get when you combine the genes of these two species. I think this is, although not named by Time magazine, but this is Homo Alterius Spacialis, higher human from space, and these are our offspring, our children that have to be hidden from us until the consciousness of our neighbors changes and was willing to accept them. This picture was shown to millions and millions of people on ABC. They didn't say anything about it, but they put this picture into the consciousness of Americans at least, and eventually the world, I think. One more time. You know you have to be somebody special to get your face on the cover of Time magazine. This is a promo issue, 23 June 1997 for the Roswell 50th anniversary, Roswell crash 50th anniversary. Certainly there is a cover-up, and all UFO researchers recognize that Project Bluebook, the most public cover-up, was just the government's public relations agency. they did announce to the world they wanted to know about our UFO sightings and stuff, but the cases that were really worthwhile and could not be explained away by some natural or man-made object were not investigated by Bluebook. They were passed on to the real investigators. And I'm convinced that the U.S. or the Office of Naval Intelligence was the office of primary responsibility for ground, or you might say ground activities associated with the alien presence. And the reason is because their bases were in Navy territory, not in Air Force territory. Although we'd see them more in the air, these things could come and go from the air down through the water, no problem. You read books like Wendell Stevens' book, Contact from Undersea. It's a very interesting story. It was 1979 when Filiberto Cardenas was pulled up a blue beam in broad daylight with 3 of his friends, taken to a little island. This wall opens up, he gets into a little flying saucer, and he goes out over the water very fast down through the water. The water didn't touch the vehicle. Ended up in a garage down there where there were a bunch of flying saucers and stuff. And the head alien down there told him there were 700 working out of that base, and there were lots of other bases underground and undersea. That first time, I just saw red lights that were about as bright as Venus would be at its brightest, maybe a minus 4.5 magnitude. But they were wandering around in random motion, and obviously not aircraft or celestial objects. And my thought was, gee, is this what I read about last Sunday morning in the newspaper? Because the Washington Star had flying saucers in the headlines. And so nothing more was happening. So I, after about 10 minutes of watching them, so I went on to bed. It was, pushing midnight by then. I got up early the next morning to get the newspaper, and sure enough, again, second Sunday morning in a row, the word flying saucers was in the headlines. The aliens put on a demonstration to the extent that the media could not ignore it and the government couldn't cover it up. Let me get back to that earlier question. Can you imagine any president, whether it be Bush or Clinton or whatever, standing before the public and saying, yes, I am aware that we have this joint program with some aliens to upgrade our biological computers, to build better bodies to house our souls in future incarnations. And we are picking up your daughters and your wives, and we're taking their eggs, we're splicing in the right genes. Some are a subspecies that look more like us, and their human mothers are allowed to raise them, but those that don't look enough like us to fit in with our society are taken at 3 to 3.5 months. They're about that long. We put them in artificial wombs. Then we pick up the mothers again, and we take them in and allow them to hold them within their aura to nurture them. We pick up the grandmothers sometimes for the same purpose. He says, they can't talk about things like that. If any president made that kind of statement, then, because they pick them up and they have to put the altered egg in there, and then they pick them up again, he wouldn't be able to do the job we hired him to do. The media would hound him to death. It'd be ridiculous. So I understand the reasons for the secrecy. I spent 26 years in the Air Force, and I know if the government has a secret they really want to keep, they don't admit they have a secret. I was fortunate I had a chance to talk to Peter Jennings for his ABC special, and the first question he asked me was, what caused you to be interested in this subject? When I was 16 years old, I was walking down the street in Arlington, Virginia, and saw 7 red light type UFOs over Washington that made headlines around the world. And since then, I've seen 8 alien vehicles on 8 occasions. It was just that 3 seconds, alien vehicles on 8 occasions, that got on the ABC special. But that started me to become a truth seeker on 26 July 1952. I've read everything I could find about UFOs and the alien presence since then. At 17, I went to Duke, read everything in their library on the subject. American Rocket Society had the most interesting stuff. Went to the Air Force 26 years as a fighter pilot, staff scientist, teacher, program manager, got a master's in nuclear engineering, retired at age 47 with 100% of my time to do whatever I wanted to do and enough money to do it. So the day after I retired officially, I became a field investigator and state section director for MUFON for 5 counties in western Florida. The next year became state director for Florida. In '89, I was elected to be the Eastern Regional Director of MUFON, overseeing the investigative activities in 18 eastern states. In '93, I became a director of the International UFO Congress. Since '82, I have been attending 6 conferences a year on the average, of many different types that involved expanding consciousness and UFOs. Things like International Transpersonal Association conferences in Killarney, Ireland, and Noetic Sciences conferences, international conferences on science and consciousness. And I heard about these things called State of the World forums that were put on by a fellow named Jim Garrison with the State of the World Forum, who is also president of the Gorbachev Foundation USA. And all the world leaders were coming and basically trying to figure out what kind of a planet we want to live on in this 21st century. And I never got an invitation. You had to get an invitation to that real select group. I was on a birding trip in Attu Island because I'm a serious birder. And I was discussing government affairs in the evening hours when we weren't out birding with a gentleman from Point Reyes who was also interested in government affairs. And I told him about State of the World forums, and he had never heard of them. It was some miracle, I think, that caused an invitation for him to attend the State of the World Forum, the 6th and last one, held in New York City in conjunction with the UN Millennium Summit, to be in his mailbox. And he didn't want to go, and he knew I did, and he just put it in the mail and said, "Why don't you go in my stead?" So when the package got there, you filled out the registration form, and there's a place for title, and I put Director, International UFO Congress. When I got there, I was quite impressed. There were about 1,500 people trying to figure out the best ways to manage globalization so that the selfish didn't gobble up the meek and destroy the environment that supports us all. I got to participate in roundtables on democratizing world government, on getting more spirituality in the United Nations and that kind of thing. I actually, when it came my turn to talk in that World Governance Conference, I suggested that people trying to decide how to get from where we are to a democratically elected world government ought to read 3 books. And I mentioned Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, because it describes 1 or 2 major UFO cases in many different countries and how that government reacted to it. And I said they should read Bud Hopkins' book, Witnessed, because this is a very good description of not UFOs coming here and saying, take me to your leader, but UFOs coming here and taking the Secretary General of the United Nations and putting a guilt trip on him for humanity polluting the oceans. And the 3rd book was called, was actually paper 72 in the book called The Urantia Book, A Revelation for Humanity, published in 1955 on 2,096 pages. And the title of the paper was Government on a Neighboring Planet. And it said at the end, the reason they gave us that was because there were ideas expressed there that would be useful on our planet at this time. Well, that conference, being an attendee, allowed me to put a web page on the exclusive State of the World Forum website, only accessible to those people that attended the 6 State of the World Forums, which include most of the heads of state. And it it apparently got the attention of the president, because about a year later I received a phone call from his vice president saying, Jim Garrison would like to speak with you. And I said, it's going to have to be this afternoon or 3 weeks from now, because I'm going to Thailand. And 3 weeks, later, they called at the appointed time, and a lovely lady named Carmen Melendres said, well, unfortunately, Jim got called out this morning, and she talked to me for about an hour about all the wild things that the ideas I've acquired at all these conferences, and so I started, sending her emails and occasionally some of the papers that I had written over the many years, and she told me later that she was forwarding all these to Jim Garrison, and the papers about telepathic communications and UFO phenomenon, and one was on transformation, spiritual, physical, and political, and I'd written papers on paths to world government. All the subjects related to the UFO phenomenon that I'd studied one at a time, and then I'd spoken on for a year, and then written a paper on. And he must have not been too disturbed by what I was saying, because he sent me an email invitation in, I think it was May of 2003, to be one of the 150 people invited to the Brussels conference, 18 to 20 June '93. The title of that conference was National Sovereignty and World Challenges, Choices for the World After Iraq. And I was to attend as a director of the International UFO Congress, which I thought was kind of interesting when you see the titles of all those other 150 participants. The conference was chaired by George Bethune, who from 1975 to 1992 was the European chairman of the Trilateral Commission. The speakers were people like Air Marshal Sir Timothy Garden, who was the head of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the kind of similar to our Council on Foreign Relations in the United States. And Pat Cox, the head of the European Parliament, I guess, just lots of other interesting people. The president of the International Chamber of Commerce, and James Woolsey, and really neat folks. So unfortunately, well, they were sending me background information that said, well, after World War I, we formed the League of Nations, and that to keep peace in the world, and that didn't work. So after World War II, we formed the United Nations, and that didn't work. Now that we've had the first two battles of World War III, meaning Afghanistan and Iraq, it's obvious the Security Council can't maintain peace in the world, and NATO can't even maintain peace in NATO. It's time for a change. And they were talking about something called Community of Nations. And I had a prior commitment on those dates that I just could not break. As much as I wanted to go to that conference, I told him, I'm sorry, I just can't break the commitment. And so he said, no problem. Why don't you make your input by email? So I did. And I felt honored when, after the conference, he sent me a draft of the output document and asked for my comment on the draft. The draft title was Integral Governance Initiative, and it outlined or described the 20 most important problems of the world. I think they decided they're so critical they don't have time to even rewrite the Charter of the United Nations to be able to effectively address those problems. So they're going to do it, one problem at a time, with the same technique that they used on the landmine ban treaty. Lord Axworthy, the Foreign Minister of Canada, with backing of the Canadian government, in not more than about 2 years, got 140 nations to sign that treaty. So I'm excited about the works that State of the World Forum is now working on to address the problems of the world.